Welcome back to the Brooklyn Junction, a podcast about growing up in Brooklyn in the 1970s and 1980s with Gen Xers and Boomers. Well, I'm not really a boomer. I'm on the edge of boomerdom. But my regular co-host, Bill Turley, is treasure hunting in the Sea of Japan. Good luck, Bill. So I hope you enjoy his brother joining me as a co-host, and here goes. So today we're going to talk about our experiences in the subterranean depths below Penn Station and Madison Square Garden, where my guest and I worked for the New York Post. We encountered quite a cast of characters, including a homeless population commonly referred to as the Mole People. Not by us, I might add, but a lot of the workers there. And they live beneath the train tracks at Penn Station. We're also going to talk about some of the idiosyncratic full-time workers, mostly avoiding work at all costs. Throwing in the commuters, many inebriated, rushing home, and you had quite a potpourri of fascinating people navigating their way through what was then an aging, decrepit Penn Station. Get started right now. Tom, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, how you doing? I'm Tom Turley, calling in from New Jersey, from Mount Holly, New Jersey.
Jersey's a great place.
It's a great place.
But there's nothing wrong with Jersey.
The part of Jersey that I live in is not New
Jersey.
York oriented at all. I mean, we have a few North Jersey people, New Yorkers, but the culture down here is totally
Jersey
different
sucks.
than what a lot of New Yorkers think of New Jersey.
Let's get right to the
Let's get right
to
to
the
it.
topic. So you and I, we worked at the New York Post, which was filled with characters.
Great job.
And it was a great job. You know, there's great jobs and not so great jobs, and that was a great job. So in the New York Post, it was underneath Madison Square Garden, and it barely covered the train ride in and out, as cheap as the train was. But, you know, it was enough to get you, you know, some lunch, some beers, or whatever you needed. And I think we did this during our college years at Brooklyn College. And so you take the subway in, or St. Francis College. I have, I remember his name, Gerard. I'm not going to use his last name. Gerard got me the job, then I got you the job. And it was, we would literally take the newspapers on huge stacks, hand trucks, up in some difficult navigation, all the way up to all the newsstands that were scattered around Penn Station. And we pretty much did the work for the union guys. They paid us a little bit of money, you know, to kind of do their job, if that's a fair comment. I mean, some of them did their job, but mostly we would walk along with these guys and deliver the newspapers to each one of the newsstands. So what's your memory of working at the New York Post?
It was great. Oh, man, I'm just reviewing all the characters. Let's start with the time that, remember that guy, that drunk guy tripped over the stand and he was like,
Oh
get
my
God, and then I was going to
God,
get into a fight with him. And then, you know, and Gil was there. And then, you know, that was it.
Introduce Gil.
Remember that?
Gil was like, he wasn't my first black friend, but he was like the coolest. And he had all that 70s kitsch going with the big afro and the pleather jacket with the belt. And,
Great man. He
and
was such a great, he was like a big brother to us.
fantastic. He was like our big brother.
He was our
And
big
this
brother.
old man this bony old man comes down the stairs.
Yeah, he was dressed
right?
like
And
he still had like he was still wearing the fedora thing, and he
Yeah.
had a few martinis, and he was going home on the Long Island Railroad, and he tripped over he was rushing to get the train. He tripped over the goddamn truck, and for some reason he singled me out. And then at first I was kind of like, gee, I'm sorry. But the guy was like, I'm a businessman and I'm going to sue you and I'm going to sue the New York Post. And then remember there was an old man, and he said, he was a foreigner because she spoke with broken English. And he said, don't you worry, son. He looks very drunk to me.
Yeah, I
And
remember
after
you
he
were
said
upset.
that,
I
it was
remember,
okay.
'cause, you know, we were good kids in our hearts,
Yeah.
you know, and this guy goes flying off the hand truck and he cut his shin, if you remember. He cut his shin and he was screaming and cursing, you know, this is irresponsible of you. I'm going to sue you and blah, blah,
It
blah.
was
And I don't
so
know how it
funny. I
ended, but
tell you, it was really, really funny. I remember the guy's face to this day. He was
so do I. It's the weirdest thing. One of those bony old man
a
faces
bony
with
old
like,
man.
you know.
He had like the wrinkles in his head. and he was all fired up, and he had glasses. Remember, he had his glasses were kind of crooked, but he was bombed. I mean, the guy smelled of, yeah, he reeked of alcohol.
We knocked him on his ass, Um, so where we worked, we'll talk about each one of these crazy guys. So there was Bob, who we loved dearly, old avuncular Irishman who kind of protected and watched over us. And, one eye out on the retirement door, but just a really sweet-natured guy, right? And then,
Great guy.
there was Barry, right, who was about 400 pounds and about 6 foot tall, always wore the same outfit every day. And
He was taller than 6 feet.
yeah, maybe
Mark.
he was
He was
6'4".
like 6'4".
Yeah.
Remember, he was a big guy. He was a big guy. Remember, Bobby used to say, "He's a strong fuck, that Barry." He was walking with like two images boxes. He was carrying those big bundles of
He
papers.
could carry those newspapers, but in reality, when you were with him, you did all the work. We were teenagers.
He did all the work. He was so lazy. Like, he would be standing right, like, next to the truck. And yeah, but he would say, "Hey, you want to put one on the end over there?" And you'd have to go all the way around because he just didn't want to do it.
Well, that's the point. Isn't that the most, if you are beyond lazy, that you're already got some minimum wage kids that assist with stacking. I think it was called stacking the newspapers on these hand trucks, these big bundles of newspapers. So you had these minimum wage kids doing it, but he was so lazy that he would pay Greg, the homeless guy, Greg, the strange homeless guy with that voice, and he used to have Greg do all his work he didn't do a goddamn thing. He would just walk along and push the truck a little bit. You could not be lazier. So in addition to two assistants, you and I, Barry hired Greg, the homeless guy who lived in Penn Station 24/7, 365 and was there
all the time. You were on a date and you saw him in Penn Station, and John was with you with a date. I guess you guys were taking the subway, and John's like, "Here's Mark. He's talking to this bum," and the guy's like, "I don't care for your friend Wayne."
What was the name of the homeless guy?
Greg. Because Wayne worked
Greg,
with us for a little while. But anyway, let's see if I remember Greg going, "I don't care for your friend Wayne. I'm going to take him and I am going to kill him. I'm going to take him by the scruff of the neck and I'm going to choke the life out of him." Oh my God. You know who he looked like? He looked like Aqualong. Greg looked like fucking Aqualong.
Yes, a short Aqualong.
A short Aqualong.
Aqualong was an album by Jethro Tull.
Remember, he used to quote Astis and Johnson to the study. He was obsessed with sex. Remember, he used to say, "Let me piss on you." He was the weirdest. And he used to call out all the time. Well, remember, he used to say, "Don Collins plays with his prick in the 8th Avenue dick house."
So the context is 8th Avenue was where men went to, go into the John and look at each other's.
There were some guys that were doing some funky things in there. And remember Bob, remember our boss, Bob, we're not going to mention last names, but our boss, Bob, said, "Jesus, there was got about 10 urinals and there's 5 guys jumping off in those urinals." The 8th Avenue shit house.
He said, "Don't go up there,
Jesus
kids."
Christ, kids. Remember he said, "Those son of a bitches, they probably have a wife and family, for God's sakes."
And here they are, flogging the log.
God, that was so funny.
And we used to sit there, and I says, "What a cast of characters." So you had, so again, the setting is we are underneath Madison Square Garden, which, had its appeal because you really, there was concerts there and stuff, but it smelt like 1,000 people had urinated, right? And remember, we had to walk through it, and there was a sign on the way into under the garden. It said, "Eat shit, a million flies can't be wrong." And we would
That's right.
What's the weirdest thing about it, and now I understand how maybe I could have survived 100 years ago, being a cleanliness freak. There was,
we'd never do that today. It was so disgusting.
I mean, but you got used to it. You'd sit in that little room with them.
Remember me, you, and Gil. Me, you, and Gil would take those trucks down there, and we would unload. There's a lot of times, like we would go, like Barry never went out, and I don't think old man, not Bob, mean Bob. Well, there was nice Bob. Bob was the boss, but then
It was the cranky, mean, racist Bob, which is so bizarre because he'd have to sit in a room with me and Gil and you know?
right.
Not that we're minorities,
I
but
don't know if he
there
was
was
that.
me.
I don't know. He was just a cranky old man. Um, but I remember, remember he would take over for Bob sometimes. Like Bob would always give you $5, which was a lot during that time. When
At the end
Bob
of the
was
week,
over, he gave you
he'd come up to
$10.
you and he'd give you an extra five. And he'd go, did I fuck you out of your five?
Right.
I didn't fuck you out of
When
your
Mean
five, did
Bob
you?
gave you the tip, he'd say, "Fuck you, thanks, Bob."
That's
Drop dead. Whatever.
So there was all these union guys that were on the, different stages of their, where they were going to head up next, retirement, really. You and I gravitated towards Gil, right? And we just liked him. It was a
Great man.
tall black guy, looked like he could have been an extra in Shaft. I mean, we looked like an extra in Dazed and Confused. You know what I mean? You got to figure the context. Was it the 70s or the 80s? I don't
It was the
remember.
late 70s.
70s.
Yeah, we were
Late
hippie,
70s.
we were hippie kids, urban hippie kids. We weren't disco guys. We were hippie kids.
Well, occasionally we would do disco, but most of the time we were,
Yeah,
and
we were out of our element.
Gil, kind of, was always friendly to us, and we'd go outside, and occasionally we'd have some adult beverages and cannabis sativa with him, if you remember.
Yeah, we smoked pot all the time.
Yeah, and he used to say the greatest thing is he'd get through the day, right? I'm going home. I'm going to get my ass all fired up and make love to my woman. And he was so just a lovely guy. And he turned me on to Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, and I think I turned him on to the Beatles or something, Chaka Khan, and yeah, I hope he did well because I remember he couldn't get into the union or something. Or
I don't know. I don't know what the story was. He worked a lot. He was a hardworking guy. I mean, he was always working. The man was always working. That's why he liked to unwind with a few beers and some weed. And very good man. But
and then we went to there was Greg, right? So Greg was this homeless guy. And, we were pure Penn Station rats, right? Meaning it carried on for a long period of time where once you left Brooklyn and went to work in the city, you'd generally get off at Penn Station. Later, I would commute. You did it a bit too, from Long Island to Penn Station. So it was a fixture in our lives. You'd go to concerts at Penn Station. You'd go see the Knicks and the Rangers at Madison Square Garden there above Penn Station. And my dad frequented Toots Shor Bar there outside of Penn Station. I got to meet Toots Shor and all these great sports figures. Like we didn't meet Mickey Mantle, but we were in the same vicinity. We breathed the same air. And, it was Jake LaMotta and Emerson Boozer and all that. But it was an interesting time in the city because the city, it was all dirty, It was just like, they think it got dirty now. I mean, it was
pretty grimy.
It was pretty grimy. And Greg, right? Greg was a homeless guy, and I would occasionally try to talk to him and I'd say, there's shelters and why don't you get a job and stuff and get a different job, get a better job. And when we would nag him, he would get upset. So I said, all right, I'm not going to nag him.
What do you know? You're only a young guy of 19 years old. What do you know?
What do you know? You know nothing. You know nothing. And then he basically did have that kind of rolling voice. And I remember one time I said to him, you do work all day long. Because remember, at night, he'd be at another stand handing out the papers,
Right. So there was a guy from the guild and his name was Don. And I remember, I guess Barry must have given Greg he would give him like a few extra bundles. They were, so Don is out there on the street and he saw Greg selling papers. And he took the papers from Greg. And I remember Greg was like, "You'll give me those papers back, you cocksucker." And he said, that's when he yelled out. That's when he yelled out. He said, "Don Collins plays for his prick in the 8th Avenue dick house."
Cocksucker. Because they used to be papers, to use the colloquial phrase at the time, oh, those papers fell off the truck. So they were uncounted papers. You know what I mean? And so Barry used to sell them, sell bundles. And then he must have cornered Greg with a couple of bundles on the corner there that were, fell off the truck, so to speak. And I remember one time I said to him, oh, you work 18-hour days. I don't know what you do on the weekends, but, where you're living is there's got to be social services. There's got to be shelters. And they used to live, which people forget that this existed, underneath Penn Station. There were these incredibly filthy,
Fuckers used to live down
grease-laden,
there.
abandoned train tracks.
They all lived. There was a whole fucking community of them. They lived in they probably still down there.
And he lived down there, right? And there was a community, right? And they basically all would stay down there overnight. And they would plug into the random electric with a black and white TV, and they had a hot plate and stuff like that. It was rat infested, right? It was incredibly rat infested. And, so they lived 2-3 levels below, and it was sort of a creepy place at times because, you'd walk by and all the coffins of people who died in other states were stacked up against the wall, which always creeped me out. Sometimes there'd be, bodies, where they came in from Amtrak or something. But you go deep into that, had not been, since it had originally built, I don't think they cleaned it once. And so I told him, there's I always used to work on him a little bit and say, there's social services things you can do this. I make more money doing the New York Post and living,
right.
but than any system that you'll help me with, And I was like, all right, I gave up. And I told him that the one woman that disgusts me, because she'd go out of her way with a little cardboard thing, and she'd sit at a pillar, and she would pee, right? And everyone would have to go, we're walking back and forth, and you're walking to the number 3 train, you're walking to the LIR. You'd have to all skip over her urine stream that ran across the entire Penn Station.
There'd be a trail of piss coming down.
She would leave her detritus all over Penn Station, and commuters, everybody had to jump over it. And again, I mean, she was clearly mentally ill. You and I used to throw her a buck here or there or something to eat, but she would just leave the detritus everywhere, in front of the stores, everywhere in Penn Station, right in the area she used to domicile there, And I made the mistake of telling Greg, right? I said, the one person that kind of disgusts me is that one woman that sits there, So every time I went by her, she'd go, hi, Mark, how are you? I said, Greg, did you tell her I complained? And he goes, of course I did. You're an impudent little slob. Why would you complain about her? She's a lovely woman. And I said, she's peeing across Penn Station, And so he was, we never really screwed around with him too much. We were always kind of friendly, supportive, and kind of. We bought him lunch. We bought him snacks every now and then. And then I remember we filled out applications for him. And we have to make a point that we were both very compassionate towards these folks. And homelessness is a very serious issue, and mental illness is a serious issue. But he was such a fascinating character that lived his own life. We were always fascinated. So again, back to Barry. Barry's 6'4", about 400 pounds, right? Laziest human being in the planet, right? So one time, you and I decided we wanted to see what was under his hat.
You had an obsession with you thought he was bald.
Is he bald? Does he got a full head of hair? Because that's what Bob Coleman, Jesus Christ, Bob Coleman, the old Irish guy, he would say, he's got a full head of hair. I don't know why he wears that stupid little cap, And so I said, let's get his hat off his head. And I stand on the hand truck, and you roll me behind him, and I take his hat off, and he indeed had a full head of hair. I take his little brown leather cap, which I don't even know.
I thought it was like a
brown leather cap,
like one of those fisherman hats that he had on.
Yeah, but it was leather. It was black leather. Yeah, and I take it off his hat, and I said, And so he goes, oh my God, you know, and he starts freaking out like emotionally, you know,
You
like
upset
there
him.
was an emotional issue with you. We upset him to no end. And, you know, and it was the only time I felt bad because Bob Coleman goes, that wasn't right. You shouldn't have done that. I know. And he said, pain in the ass. He's a lazy bastard, but you shouldn't have done that. That wasn't very nice of you. You know, I mean, the poor man couldn't go to sleep, couldn't eat and go to sleep. And I said, well, maybe he
He
shouldn't
yelled
eat
at
it,
his
you know?
wife,
And then
Gail,
Bob
about the
left.
bank book. Remember that? He goes, you give me that bank book.
No, what was that? What
I
happened?
yelled at my beautiful wife,
What?
Gail. I said, you give me that bank book. And he said to Bob, he says, Bobby, I was so upset with those kids. I yelled at my wife. I said, you give me that bank book. Very, because every day he would go to the bank. He said every day he would go and
Yeah.
check his balance at the bank. He had an obsession with money.
Well, I mean, if you don't have any, you
Oh, he had
generally,
it, I think.
you know,
He had
you
no
generally have it.
children.
Well, some people that have it still, you know, but you know what was, the other thing that was intriguing is that, so we worked for the New York Post down there, right? And there was all the cops, some of the cops were
That's
hanging out
right.
down
Oh,
there.
I forgot about that
And if you
guy.
remember, Ted Kennedy was coming to Penn Station, right? You know, and there was a sergeant, and we would do little things for him at the behest of Bob. Like like they were closing up a particular store, and we'd take the stuff out and bring it to his truck of his car, like the ice box
Yeah.
and things like that. And they were throwing it out anyway. So it's not, to be honest, there's nothing wrong with what he was doing. They were going to just chuck it into the
Right. He was a
garbage, you know?
hacker.
But I remember one time I used to be able to do the Kennedy
Right.
impersonation, you know? And so I'm like 19 and I'm walking through Penn Station with the cop. And he goes, and I go, let the word go forth from this time in space, I need another cocktail. You know? He gets mad at me. He was scared because he's a big cop. And he goes, oh my God, you're going to get me fired. Kennedy's going to be here any minute. You're doing his voice. Get the hell out of here. You
I
remember that? Because
remember
you were
that.
with me.
I remember
Yeah.
that.
It was something else. Yeah. There's no joke to be doing Kennedy with Kennedy coming and his two brothers getting shot.
I remember he came into the office. He goes, what the hell? You're telling them that Kennedy's coming. Because even if you imitate him, it's no, that's no fucking joke. He was so mad, that guy. Oh,
And we got to see Ted Kennedy.
yes.
One of two times I was within the same relative vicinity. Another was a bar in Washington decades later. But that's for another podcast and brief encounters. During this period, you and I worked at the Garden in Penn Station. Our mayor was Koch. I thought Koch was a pretty good mayor, and he started in the late
Yes.
70s, went all the way till, I think, 1989. In the end, was he the greatest mayor? Maybe, but I remember him being ubiquitous. He was everywhere all the time, and I ran into him a couple of times out in the city, literally. But that's a story for another day. He used to say, how am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? And I remember that the city was still really dangerous, you know, right in the middle of his tenure.
Yes.
I might be wrong, but I think the murder rate was at the highest in New York history. And you also have to add that the subways were decaying, the infrastructure was crumbling, and it's 2024, and they've just begun to complete the restoration of Penn Station, which was proposed by Moynihan, Senator Moynihan, in the 90s, I believe. I can honestly say I am not sure if there are homeless living below Penn Station today, and I hope there aren't. I don't know.
All aboard, track 15.
All right, Tom, this is the end of part one of great jobs and not so great jobs and our time together at Penn Station, Madison Square Garden, working for the New York Post. I want to thank you for joining us today, and why don't you take us out?
Hey, as my buddy Jimmy used to say, ciao for now. I'm going to take him by the scruff of the neck, and I'm going to choke the life out of him.
Just Slide It Away, written, performed, and recorded by William Turley, who's off to Japan.